I used to believe that Arbor Heights was the kind of town where nothing happened. A sleepy stretch of suburban comfort nestled in Oregon's rolling green, where the loudest sound was the church bell on Sundays and the most scandalous thing was when the mayor's dog peed on someone's lawn during the 4th of July parade. My name is Naomi Carter, and for most of my 23 years, I thought I had grown up in one of the most uneventful corners of America. Turns out, I was wrong. On the surface, everything about our family looked just right. My mom Linda was the nurse every patient wanted at their bedside. She worked double shifts at the local hospital but still managed to bake 3-tier cakes for birthdays and keep track of everyone's dental appointments. My dad Harold ran a small auto repair shop down by the highway. He was the kind of man who fixed more than just engines. Neighbors came to him for car troubles, home repairs, and the kind of steady wisdom that only came from living life at eye level. Never rushing, never retreating. We lived in a modest one-story house painted pale blue with white trim, surrounded by a garden my mom obsessively pruned and flower beds dad dutifully watered. From the outside, it was the American dream in lowercase letters. Predictable, peaceful, ordinary. And then there were the Sunday dinners. Every week without fail, we gathered at my grandmother Joyce's house, a cozy brown bungalow 5 blocks away. It was a ritual stitched into the fabric of our lives. Grandma Joyce was a retired librarian who believed in strict mealtimes and strong opinions. She always cooked too much, wore an apron embroidered with her initials, and had this uncanny ability to steer any conversation toward politics, whether it started with football or weather. Also at that table was Brian, Mom's younger brother. If Grandma was a storybook, Brian was the footnote someone tried to ignore. He drifted through jobs and relationships, often smelling of beer, arriving late with grand stories that didn't quite line up with reality. But he was family, and Sunday meant everyone showed up, no matter what. This particular Sunday was supposed to be special. I had been offered an internship with a top design agency in Seattle, something I had worked toward for years. My portfolio, sleepless nights, rejection letters, and relentless networking had finally paid off. I had told myself that dinner would be a celebration, a moment to share the news and see the people I loved proud of me. And for a while, that is exactly what it was. Mom was bustling around the kitchen. Dad was trying to fix Grandma's wobbly dining chair. Brian had not shown up yet, which, honestly, felt like a gift. I sat at the table, rehearsing how I would announce it, fingers tracing the edge of my napkin. But I should have known better. Life has a way of holding its breath right before it breaks wide open. I did not know then that this dinner would not be a celebration. It would be a detonation. And that everything I thought I knew about who I was, about where I came from, about what my family meant to me, was about to unravel. Because sometimes, the deepest truths are the ones people work the hardest to hide. And sometimes, the person who blows it all up is the one you never expect to even speak. Dinner had just started when the front door creaked open. Brian stepped in, reeking faintly of whiskey and late afternoon regret. He wore a wrinkled t-shirt with a faded band logo and sunglasses pushed carelessly onto his head, even though the sun had long set. "Sorry I'm late," he muttered, not looking at anyone in particular, before slumping into the empty chair across from me. My mom immediately shifted gears, plastering a smile onto her face as if sheer effort could smooth over whatever storm Brian had walked in with. "We're just getting started," she said, nudging the bowl of roasted potatoes toward him. He grunted in response, reached for the nearest beer, and twisted it open without asking. I tried to steady myself. This was my moment. The announcement I had rehearsed in my head over and over. I cleared my throat and began, "So I've got some news." Everyone turned toward me, forks pausing midair. "I got the internship. The design firm in Seattle. I start in 2 weeks. For a second, there was silence. Then a swell of joy, Grandma clapped, Mom's hands flew to her mouth in delighted surprise, Dad nodded proudly, and even Brian smirked and raised his beer in mock salute. "Look at you," he said, voice thick. "Guess all that money Linda spent buying you paid off after all." There was a silence then, a different kind, one that spread through the room like spilled gasoline. My fork slipped from my hand and hit the plate with a loud clatter. I blinked at him, trying to decipher if I had misheard. "What did you just say?" I asked, not quite believing the words. Brian chuckled, as if he had told a particularly edgy joke. But no one else was laughing. My mom had gone sheet white. Dad had stopped mid-chew, jaw tightening as he set his utensils down. Grandma Joyce let out a soft, wounded exhale, like something in her had been waiting for this moment and dreading it in equal measure. Brian took another swig from his beer and leaned back in his chair, arms folded. I said, he began again, but my mom cut him off. Brian, don't. Her voice was brittle, urgent. She deserves to know, he snapped, eyes now fixed on me. She's a grown woman, and she's about to leave this house thinking her life is one thing when it's not. I felt my heart beating against my ribs like it was trying to escape. Know what? I asked, voice cracking. What is he talking about? Mom shook her head. It's not the time, she said quietly. There's never going to be a good time, Brian retorted. You all were fine lying to her forever? Dad stood up so fast the chair scraped harshly across the floor. That's enough, he growled, his voice barely controlled. Sit down, Grandma said, her voice not loud but sharp enough to freeze everyone in place. Let him speak. We've delayed this too long. Brian looked at me, his smirk fading into something grimmer, harder. You're not adopted, Naomi. Not in the legal sense. They didn't go through any agency. You weren't brought home with paperwork and a social worker. You were bought. $18,000. Cash. Straight from Linda's hands to some girl who couldn't handle being a mom. My stomach turned. That's a lie, I said, even though every piece of my gut was already unraveling. Tell me it's a lie. But no one spoke. My mom's eyes brimmed with tears. Her hands trembling in her lap. My dad's face was clenched, knuckles white against the edge of the table. Say something, I pleaded. Tell me he's drunk. Tell me he's just trying to mess with me. Naomi, Mom whispered, and my name broke in her throat like glass. We wanted to tell you. We always meant to, but what? I shouted, standing. You thought I didn't deserve the truth? You thought I'd never figure it out? The room spun. I could hear my breath but not much else. Everything slowed, as if time itself was trying to give me space to understand what had just cracked open. The truth wasn't a clean wound. It was jagged and ugly and decades old. I looked around at the people who raised me, loved me, supported my dreams, and realized they had built that love on a secret so profound it altered the very ground beneath my feet. And in that moment, I wasn't sure who I was anymore. The silence in the room had weight to it, like an old coat soaked through by rain, heavy and impossible to ignore. I stood there, fists clenched at my sides, staring at my parents. My mind raced, desperate to find solid ground, some rational explanation that would make this a misunderstanding. But the expressions on their faces told me there would be no such comfort. Is it true? I asked, my voice tight, words barely escaping. Did you buy me? My father, usually a man of restraint and calm, looked like he had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. He sat back down slowly, exhaling a breath that sounded like it had been held for decades. We didn't buy you like you were an object, he said, finally speaking. But we didn't go through official channels. We didn't adopt you the way most people do. I turned to my mother. Her eyes wouldn't meet mine. She was still trembling, her shoulders hunched, hands clasped tightly as if prayer could undo what had just happened. You were born to a young woman, Dad continued, someone in a terrible situation. She lived in our building back then. Her name was Sierra. She was 20, scared, hooked on painkillers, and living with a boyfriend who, he trailed off, then shook his head, unwilling to say it. She was trying to survive, barely. My breath caught. Sierra? I echoed the name, but it meant nothing to me. Just a stranger's name, until it wasn't. She was 6 months pregnant when we met her, Dad said. Your mom started bringing her groceries, checking in on her. Eventually, she told us she planned to give up the baby after birth. But she couldn't afford legal help. Didn't trust the system, and was afraid her ex would find her. Your mother asked if we could help. And Sierra said yes. My stomach turned again. It wasn't that I couldn't understand desperation. But I couldn't understand how two people who loved me could keep a truth this enormous locked away. So you handed her money? I asked, voice sharp. $18,000? Mom finally spoke, voice hoarse. It was for her care. Her rent. Her doctor's visits. Her escape. We never saw it as buying you. We thought we were helping her and giving you a better life at the same time." I laughed, bitter and hollow. "You thought keeping this from me would make it okay?" "We were going to tell you," she said, tears now streaming freely. "We just never knew when. Then time passed, and every year it got harder. We were afraid you'd hate us, afraid we'd lose you." I stepped back, needing air, space, answers. My mind spiraled through memories. No baby photos before age 2. No stories about labor or my birth. Vague explanations about paperwork delays. I had always felt the gaps. I just never dared to pull them apart. "Did you falsify records?" I asked, the question tasting like rust. "Did you pretend I was born to you?" Dad nodded slowly. "We filed paperwork months later, after things settled. We didn't lie to the government, we just never told the full story." "You lied to me," I said coldly. That sentence hung between us longer than any other. My mother broke down, covering her face with both hands. Sobbing without sound. My father looked like a man sinking into himself. Grandma Joyce, silent until now, stood up. "Naomi," she said gently. I knew from the beginning. And I'm sorry." I turned to her, shocked. "You too?" She nodded. "I thought they would tell you when the time was right. But the time never came. And I let it happen. That's on me." The betrayal came not in one clean wound, but 100 small cuts. Everyone I trusted had been holding pieces of the truth, pieces of me. And not one of them had chosen to share them. "So my entire life," I said, "has been a lie wrapped in love." "It wasn't a lie," my father said quietly. "It was just a truth we were too afraid to say out loud." I wanted to scream. I wanted to break something. I wanted to run until the town disappeared in the rearview mirror. But I stayed standing, silent, staring at the only family I had ever known, and feeling further from them than I had ever felt in my life. That night, I did not sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed, still fully dressed, the hum of the ceiling fan filling the silence like background noise in a film I could no longer follow. Sierra. The name repeated in my mind like a foreign word I was being forced to memorize. My birth mother. A woman I had never seen. A woman who, according to my parents, had once held me in her arms and then handed me over in exchange for a promise and $18,000. I opened my laptop, hands shaking, and searched. Sierra plus our town's name. Nothing. I added keywords. Drug recovery. Pregnancy clinic. Public records. It was like searching for a ghost. Someone who had existed only briefly and then vanished. The next morning, I did not join my parents for breakfast. I ignored the knock on my door, ignored the texts from my mom that said things like, "We love you," and "We can talk more when you're ready." I was not ready. I was nowhere close to ready. I left the house and drove without a destination. I ended up in front of my grandmother's house. She opened the door before I even knocked. She must have seen me from the window. "Naomi," she said softly. I stared at her, not saying anything. I did not have words. Not yet. She let me in, and I sat at her kitchen table, the place where dozens of Sunday dinners had played out, the stage for celebration and now collapse. She poured tea. I let it grow cold. "You said last night that you knew," I said finally. She nodded. "Since the beginning. And you never thought I deserved the truth?" "I thought they would tell you. I thought it was their story to share. But then you got older, and they got more scared, and the silence just stretched." I swallowed. "Do you know where she is?" Grandma did not pretend to misunderstand. She took a moment, her fingers curling around the mug in front of her. "She works at the Westview Public Library. Children's section. Been there a few years now. Lives on the edge of town." I blinked. "She's here?" She nodded. "She moved back about 5 years ago. She didn't know we were here at first. It was just coincidence." I felt dizzy. "And you've seen her?" "Several times. She's doing well. Looks healthy. Hasn't touched anything harmful in years." "Why didn't you tell me?" My voice cracked again. "Because I promised Linda I wouldn't. Because Sierra didn't try to contact you. She thought it would mess up your life." "Mess up my life." I laughed bitterly. My life had already been broken open by a drunk man with a big mouth. But Grandma was not the enemy. Not entirely. She looked older today, smaller. "Did she ever ask about me?" I asked. "Every single time I saw her," Grandma whispered. "She never asked for your number. Never pushed. But she always asked if you were happy. If you were safe." I nodded. I want to meet her. Grandma hesitated. Are you sure? I need to see her face. I need to understand. Then I'll call her. An hour later, I was sitting in a corner booth of a quiet cafe with peeling wallpaper and the smell of old coffee soaked into the cushions. The woman who walked in was not what I expected. Not broken, not desperate. She was small, with sharp eyes and streaks of gray in her hair. She wore a cardigan and carried a canvas tote that had books peeking out. She walked like someone who had worked hard to rebuild her balance. Naomi? She asked, voice uncertain. I nodded. She sat across from me. For a moment, we just looked at each other. I could not find her in my features, and that unsettled me. But the connection was not in the mirror. It was in the air. I never expected to see you, she said quietly. Not like this. Me neither, I replied. But here we are. She nodded. I guess you know everything now. Not everything. Just enough to break everything I thought I knew. She winced. I'm sorry. Why didn't you keep me? I asked, the question raw and direct. Because I couldn't, she said. I was 20. Addicted. Being hurt by someone I couldn't leave. I was terrified I'd kill you by accident. When I met Linda, I saw safety. I saw someone who could protect you the way I couldn't. I didn't respond. She continued. The money was never the reason. It helped me get out, yes. It helped me get clean. But I would have done it without a cent if it meant you'd be okay. Then why stay away? Because I had no right to your life after I gave it up. I watched from a distance because I didn't want to break anything that was whole. I looked at her for a long time. This woman had given me up and then stayed away. She had kept her silence. And yet, she had never stopped caring. She had tracked my school awards, my art exhibitions. She even mentioned a piece I had designed for a local event that no one but my parents had seen. She had watched me grow through borrowed glimpses. She had loved me in absence. I realized then that nothing about my story was simple. My life had not been built on lies. It had been built on fear, yes. But also on a kind of desperate love. A mother who gave me away to save me. Another who raised me as her own. And a grandmother who had kept the balance as best she could. I still had questions. I still had hurt. But I also had the beginning of clarity. When I walked back into the house that night, my parents were still sitting at the kitchen table, as if they had not moved since the moment I left. The overhead light cast shadows under their eyes, and the silence between them was so complete it felt like I was intruding on something sacred or broken or both. I stood at the threshold for a moment before finally stepping in. My mom looked up first. Her eyes were red and swollen. Dad looked worn down in a way I had never seen before, like someone who had been carrying a weight that had finally crushed something inside him. I sat down across from them, not because I had forgiven them, but because I needed to look them in the eyes. I met her, I said. My mom inhaled sharply. Dad's face twitched, but he said nothing. Her name is Sierra. She works at the library. She looks nothing like me, but she knew things about my life I never expected. Things you never told her. She's been watching from the sidelines. We didn't want her in your life, my mom said, her voice barely above a whisper. We thought it would confuse things. We thought we were protecting you. But you weren't protecting me, I replied. You were protecting yourselves. From guilt. From the possibility that I'd want to leave. You told yourselves a story for so long you started believing it was the truth. And you made that story my foundation. My dad cleared his throat, then finally spoke. You were never a transaction to us. I don't care what Brian said. I don't care what words get thrown around. You were never something we bought. We tried to do what we thought was right in a situation that had no easy answers. But you lied, I said. Every year, every time I asked questions. You didn't trust me with the truth. My mom's hands shook as she reached for her tea. We were afraid, she said. We saw how happy you were. We thought the truth would ruin that. We didn't know how to go back once we'd chosen silence. You didn't choose silence, I said. You chose control. Over my story. Over my identity. We sat there for a long time. No one raised their voice. There was no more anger to spill. Just the aftermath. The silence of people trying to rebuild something with the broken pieces of everything they thought was solid. Eventually, I said, she's not trying to take me from you. She never was. She gave me to you because she thought you could do better. And you did. But that doesn't erase her. My mom looked at me then. Really looked. There was pain in her eyes, but also something else. Understanding, maybe. Or surrender. I never hated her, she said slowly. I envied her. Because she gave you something I couldn't. Because a part of you would always belong to her. And that scared me. I nodded. You're both my mothers. Not in the same way. But both real. And both permanent. My dad wiped his face with both hands. We love you, Naomi. We've always loved you. I know, I said. But love isn't a shield against truth. The next week, Sierra came to Sunday dinner. It was awkward, quiet, but no one left. She brought a pie she had baked herself and sat beside Grandma Joyce, who smiled at her like an old friend. My mom didn't speak much that evening, but she listened. And she watched Sierra with cautious eyes that slowly softened over time. It wasn't easy. There were still moments that stung, words that hung in the air longer than they should have. But it was a start. I realized then that family is not about perfect histories or tidy beginnings. It's about what we choose to do when the curtain is pulled back. When the roles collapse. When the truth stands naked in the room. My life was not what I had believed it to be. But that did not mean it was worthless or fake. It just meant it was more complicated than I had been allowed to know. And now, finally, it was mine to understand. The following weeks were a strange blend of healing and hesitation. I continued packing for Seattle, organizing files, saying goodbye to childhood habits. But everything felt different now. There were no longer clean lines between the people in my life. My mother was not just my mother. My father was not just the man who had raised me. And Sierra was no longer a shadow from the past. She was a breathing, present, complicated truth, and she had stepped into my story not to rewrite it, but to add to it. Each Sunday, Sierra returned. The first few dinners were quiet, filled with surface talk and awkward silences, but over time, something began to shift. My mom and Sierra found a rhythm, exchanging careful sentences, learning how to exist in the same space without comparison or competition. My father never said much to Sierra, but the way he pulled out her chair and offered to refill her water spoke volumes. Grandma Joyce, as always, became the quiet bridge between us, offering gentle commentary, asking Sierra about the library's new reading program, asking me about design software I knew she didn't really understand. One night, after dinner, I sat on the back porch with Sierra. The sky was fading into the deep navy of late summer, and the air was filled with the scent of cut grass and distant barbecue smoke. "You're leaving soon," she said, not as a question. I nodded. "Next week." She smiled softly. "I always thought about you growing up, wondering where you'd go, who you'd become. I used to imagine you in a big city, walking fast, carrying a sketchbook, chasing something that made your eyes light up." I looked at her. "That's surprisingly accurate." She laughed gently. "I didn't know how much of you was me and how much was them. But I see now, you're both. You're all of it." I stared at the stars, feeling the truth settle in my chest like a steady weight. I used to think I needed answers to feel whole. Now I think I just needed the right people to be honest with me. "We all failed you in some way," she said. "But I hope we're failing better now." The morning I left for Seattle, both my moms were there. Linda made me a travel kit with snacks and tissues and a handwritten note that said she was proud of me no matter what. Sierra handed me a small photo album, filled with pictures Grandma had taken secretly over the years. My first school play. A blurry image of me painting in the garage. My high school graduation. "I didn't want to forget what I never got to be part of," she said. "Now, maybe I don't have to watch from the edges anymore." I hugged her tightly, feeling something release inside me. It wasn't closure. It was opening. That fall, in the middle of balancing design assignments and working part-time in a print shop, I started a small side project with Sierra. We created custom book covers and promotional posters for local authors. She brought the love of stories, I brought the visuals, and together we built something small but meaningful. Every time she sent me a draft, she wrote at the bottom, "Still proud of you." Linda, meanwhile, sent me weekly messages, photos of the dog, updates from town, occasional recipes I had never managed to master. Her messages always ended with, "Love you. Always will." I learned something that year. Truth, even when it shatters everything, is not a weapon. It's a mirror. Sometimes it shows us things we never asked to see. Sometimes it ruins the image we were clinging to. But when we look long enough, when we stop running, truth can also become a compass. Not because it makes things easier, but because it makes things real. My life was never simple. But it was never fake. It was full of mistakes and fear and choices made by people who were trying their best with what they had. I carry all of it now, the sorrow, the clarity, the tangled roots of where I came from. I used to think I needed to erase parts of my past to feel like I belonged. But I was wrong. I belong because I choose to. I choose to carry all of it forward, not as a burden, but as proof that I survived, that I am still building, still loving, still here.